Okay, good afternoon everyone. Apologies for starting just a minute late, but let me start by going through the housekeeping information. My name, of course, is Councillor Peter Candlish, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Transport, and we'll be running this meeting. On the housekeeping information, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. We will assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the University Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. Everyone speaking will be on camera, apart from anyone who is far down to my right. And please could everyone ensure that they speak directly into the microphone to ensure that the audio is clear on the live web stream. So before we get going any further, I'd like to do some introductions. I've already introduced myself as Councillor Peter Candlish. I would now like to start with Councillor Bosher, and we'll go around the hall.
Councillor Simon Bosher, Conservative spokesman for Transport.
Councillor Graham Heaney, Labour Group spokesman for Transport.
Councillor Emily Strudwick, Portsmouth Independent Party.
Councillor Joe Standen, Reform UK.
Barbara Thomas, TRO Team Lead, Portsmouth City Council.
Bethan Clements, Transport Delivery Manager.
Michael Thomas, Strategic EV Planner.
Denise Bastow, Parking Office Manager.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport.
Not following my own advice. We have some deputations today, so if you'd like to introduce yourselves as well, please.
Ian Utting, resident of Collins Road.
Andrew Parsons, resident at, so my address is Adair Road, but part of it's in Worsley Street. It's confusing.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have a full house in terms of councillors here. Everyone, I've received no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest that people need to make? If there are no declarations of interest, I'm going to move on, and we're going to move to the business matters of the day. And today we've got 3 items on the agenda: a TRO related to disabled persons parking, batch 4 of the EV charge point programme, and parking and waiting restrictions on Tangier Road. And we're going to start out with the disabled bay parking. And for that, if I could ask Denise to give us a short summary.
Yes, of course, thank you. So this report is to consider the objections that have been received to Traffic Regulation Order reference PO 28 of 2025, which was advertised to introduce 28 new disabled parking bays and remove 68 disabled parking bays in various roads in Portsmouth. To be eligible for a bay, the applicant has to have a valid blue badge, and the most recent figures confirm there's just over 8,200 blue badge holders in Portsmouth. The pressures on parking in the city continue to increase, and although this order was advertised to introduce 28 new disabled parking bays, it also removed 68 disabled bays. We obviously continue to review existing disabled bays outside residential properties, and where they're no longer required, we are actively removing them. There are currently 2,125 disabled bays in residential roads, and since April 2025 we've installed 161 new bays and removed 140. This report considers 3 objections to 4 disabled bay locations, namely in 5th Street, 2 bays in Tennyson Road and 1 in Westbourne Road. 5th Street is the only location within our existing residence parking zone, the GC zone. The reasons for the objection are, for 5th Street, Objection was made expressing concern that the disabled bay would extend partly across the person's objecting property and asking us to consider extending it across the other way towards number 111 instead of 107. The reason why we chose a particular location was due to there being double yellow lines on the corner of the road, and if we were to extend the disabled bay across back towards number 111, this would end up leaving an unusable parking gap of around 3 metres between the end of the double yellow lines and the start of the disabled bay. We always seek to maximise parking space when considering the location of disabled bays. The objections for Tennyson Road, both Bays and Westbourne Road, were on the grounds that it's difficult to find parking and further disabled bays will cause a loss of parking space for other residents. In all cases, the applicants are likely to already be parking in the relevant roads where the disabled bays have been proposed, resulting in no real loss of parking space. They all have difficulties whilst walking and will therefore benefit from having a disabled bay close to or outside where they live, thereby minimising the distance they have to walk from parking their car to where they live. In relation to the proposal promoted under the Traffic Regulation Order reference PO 2825, it is recommended that the Cabinet Member for Transport approves the implementation of disabled persons parking bays in 5th Street, Tennyson Road, 2 bays and Westbourne Road, and notes that the remainder of the order relating to the bays that did not have any objections came into operation as a Part A Traffic Regulation Order, with the exception of Locano Road, which is going to be re-advertised on a future TRO. Therefore, any proposals approved following this report will be brought into operation as a Part B Traffic Regulation Order. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. This is something we see on a fairly regular basis. Are there any questions from councillors?
If I may, yeah, I mean, normally these are very specific local ones, but I did sort of have a bit of a query about this because the resident made an interesting point. This bay is going to be outside the property and they may wish to apply for a disabled parking bay for some reason because obviously they may qualify for it. Would we then locate the bay immediately adjacent to this one? And we always say that the disabled parking bays are not actually personal. So how would we deal with the issue of a parking bay outside someone's home who then may wish to apply? I know this is a slightly hypothetical question, but I just think it might be worth, how would we deal with that? Would we park it adjacent? And I have a second question about the yellow lines. So I'll leave the first one first, and then I'll come back to the yellow lines in a minute, if I may.
So I'm happy to respond directly on this one because I think you do touch upon a good point. As I think the report shows, the number of disabled parking spaces in the city is on a gradually rising trend, and it is becoming more common that we see several of these being close together. The policy is that at the moment we are saying that anyone who qualifies to get a blue badge is entitled to apply for a parking space close to their home, but we in no way offer it to be directly outside their home or even the most immediately available space to them. So I think this is something we are going to see more and more, and in the hypothetical case that you advanced there, I would be looking at it and saying, first of all, is the person qualifying? If the person is qualifying, I think the thing to do would be to look for the next nearest suitable place. And that might have to be slightly further away than it would be at some time, because as you said in your piece, it is not the case that the spaces are allocated to individuals. It is generally that if we are going to put something close for someone who has applied for it, it makes perfect sense to make it as close as is practical possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's quite helpful. It's a little bit difficult to get a sense of the perspective on the photographs that are in the Appendix B, because obviously they're taken from an angle that may misrepresent distances, so I may have got this slightly wrong. I mean, looking at the yellow lines, the objector does actually say, oh, why are you having three yellow lines outside the three houses? I mean, I can see, obviously, in one of the photographs, there is an access point on the corner, and obviously they need to be able to get out and see vehicles, so that I could possibly see a logic for that. But was any consideration given to maybe whether those yellow lines, particularly from the nearest point, where being shortened a little bit to allow a little bit more space? Was that either feasible or considered? Well, considered or feasible, that would be the way around, wouldn't it?
Yes, we did obviously look at that. I mean, the double yellow lines that are in place actually went in as part of the newly introduced GC residence parking scheme, which went live earlier this year. And obviously, when this application came in, that reference to the double yellow lines was obviously mentioned. We had a conversation with obviously the road safety team and the traffic regulation order team, and the reason for the length of them in that particular situation is there for two reasons. One is obviously the access getting into and out of the garages that are there on the corner, but it's a very tight bend right at that. It's a 90-degree bend, so it's quite difficult potentially, and you want to allow enough space for vehicles coming round the bend to sort of not then end up being confronted. So, I mean, if I could just add one other thing on the other question you raised, it's actually only going across the neighbouring property by about 1 metre, and that's really because most, these type of properties are only around 4 to 4.5 metres wide, and a disabled bay has to be a minimum of 5 metres wide. So we do then have to sometimes encroach slightly across the neighbouring property.
Thank you for that. I mean, obviously, I said the photograph doesn't fully show the picture, but I could see the bend, and I wasn't quite sure on that. That's perfectly, I understand the answer to the question. That's perfectly adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, for adding that piece to it. It does help. It is well known, I think, to all of us in the room about how tight parking is across the city. So it's something that's looked at on all the applications very carefully, because we know it matters to residents, and is something that must be looked at. Okay, are there any more questions? Are there any comments? So I've been through the detail of the comments, and actually we've discussed it a couple of times. And although I understand some of the commentary that is made by those in the who are objecting, I think, as I started with, the overall policy priority about providing the Blue Bay badge spaces, the disabled parking persons scheme places, which is supported by the blue badges, is something that at the moment we are putting as a high priority, and I'm therefore going to approve these disabled spaces. And I'd further note also that this is one of those instances, because people often ask, are we also taking out disabled spaces when these become no longer required by someone? And the answer is yes. In this instance, we've actually got fewer going in than are coming out. But that is a balance, and that is not always the case on every time we see this type of report. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next item, which is so this is around batch 4 of the on-street residential parking scheme EV charge point installation programs that we've seen a few times already before. So we're going to follow very much the same format, but I'm going to ask Denise to ask Bethan to give us an introduction and summary of the report.
Thank you. So this is the report on the TRO consultation for batch 4 of the electric vehicle residential charge point scheme. This covers Central Southsea, East Knee and St Jude, and is proposing designated EV charging bays in 56 locations. I'd like to provide some context on these proposals, if I may. National policy and legislative drivers are enforced by the zero emission vehicle mandate and requires that 80% of new car sales to be zero emission by 2030 and 100% by 2025 for both cars and vans. The number of EVs in the city has doubled since 2021, and in Portsmouth we expect to see the number of electric vehicles to increase further to 20,000 vehicles in the next 5 years, which is roughly 23.7% of vehicles owned. and this is set to increase to around 50%, which is over approximately 38,000 vehicles by 2034. More than half of car owners surveyed by central government in 2021 stated that a lack of infrastructure was one of the biggest barriers to EV adoption. The UK's policy on EV infrastructure sets out a vision where everyone can find and access reliable public charging wherever they live. This means that EV infrastructure must be built ahead of the need to gain consumer confidence, as recommended by the EV Energy Task Force in 2022, which is a national task force, not a local one. There is a role for local councils to directly support the installation of EV infrastructure ahead of and as demand grows. Doing so is expected to accelerate the uptake of EV by providing a visible network to give existing and future owners with charging confidence. Our role as a council, we have a duty to ensure a fair and equitable provision of EV infrastructure. Only 36% of properties in the city have access to off-street parking, and drivers without off-street parking are largely reliant on public charging. Our role as a local authority is to facilitate the provision of convenient and affordable charging infrastructure near to where people live, and ensure that EV infrastructure is deployed to serve all residents equally. The EV market is in its early stages, but it's growing rapidly. Utilisation, therefore, can initially be quite low, and we expect to see this grow as the EV network across the city becomes more visible with greater consumer confidence. The Council embarked on EV infrastructure provisions some years ago and have been responsive to national government policy and ensuring that we are enabling our residents to be able to choose an EV with confidence. The on-street residential charging scheme aims to deliver, in total, around 320 charge points, citywide, utilising central government funding. This has been taken forward as batches, and the first 3 traffic regulation orders have been through decision meetings this year in June, July and September. We have a clear process for site selection based on resident requests, which has previously been discussed at these meetings. Sites taken forward are done so under a traffic regulation order, which follows a prescribed statutory process, and consultation is part of that. This TRO undertook public consultation from the 11th of August to the 12th of September this year. This is a week longer than the statutory 21 days, supported by an additional letter drop to notify residents. All responses to the consultation are recorded in Appendix C, and that's 135 total from 120 individuals. The responses fall within key themes which have been noted in the report and previously discussed at length in previous decision meetings. Therefore, the report recommends proceeding with the locations as advertised. Thank you.
My apologies. At this point, we have 2 deputations to be made. I need to kind of set out the guidelines by which these will be done. So each deputy will have 6 minutes to speak on their to make their deputation. But I also need to recognise the fact that we've received in an additional deputation, written deputation, and it was only received today, and I don't know whether councillors have had a chance to have a look at that. And I refer to Standing Order 24D/(2) on this. Have councillors had a chance to read this document? Because we have 2 alternatives at this point. In the interest of balance and proportionality, I'm happy to give you 15-20 minutes to go through the document and have a look at it. I have had time to read it, and I could go ahead, but I want to make sure that you have the opportunity also to study it if you would wish. That's Mr. Parsons' one, yes. Which I think has everyone now got a copy of that? Yeah.
I mean, normally what we do is if someone wants to give a deputation, they're entitled to do so. And any written thing, might well summarise that. If people give a paper of deputation and don't, it's not like 2 bites of the cherry in a sense, I mean, so if somebody can't be here, we will obviously read it out of the deputation. I mean, I think I'm quite happy to hear what the deputations have to say, because I'm sure they'll summarise their case really well. I mean, I picked up this at about 12:30. I have had a look through. I haven't read every single bit of it, but I've got the general gist of what it's saying, so I don't have a problem with that.
So, Mr. Parsons, I'm going to ask you to use your 6 minutes to kind of take us through the essence of your deputation. You can refer to the document, and I will give you a little bit of warning as we come to the end of the 6 minute period, but I will keep you to roughly like that, because we try to offer about the same time to everyone.
I don't know if it's permissible, but Mr. Utting has kindly said that he's going to be taking a lot less than 6 minutes. So is it possible I can have a few of his spare ones?
It doesn't work that way, but I will bear it in mind with how strongly I enforce the last few moments of your 6 minutes and such like.
Very well, thank you very much. I put in the written submissions, let me be clear, because I was aware that I only had 6 minutes, and therefore they're designed to supplement what I'm saying. So it is really rather important that they are read. I apologise for them being late, but I only the day before yesterday received some answers to some important questions I'd asked that related to the actual recommendation. And I look at the 2.2, the recommendation, which talks about the funding deadline, the time taken to design and process an individual site. Any locations not implemented as part of this decision will no longer be able to be reviewed or implemented at further stages. And that links with paragraph 3.4 of the report, where it says the scheme funders have recently confirmed that funding will not be extended into the 2026-27 financial year. I received an answer to a question, which is, well, when was that? And it turns out, and it's a point I've made in the written submissions, that what has actually happened is that the information was only imparted to the council on Monday the 15th of September. Now that date is important because it's after the deadline for representations and the consultation period closed. Now it seems that the key reason for recommending a blanket approval of all of these EV charge points is a funding imperative. So what is happening here, on the face of it at least, I submit, is that funding considerations are overriding all others. And that is a concern, that's one of my general concerns, because the council does have other competing duties. I hear what's being said about a duty to try and further the use of electric vehicles, but what about the statutory duty to ensure that there is fair and reasonable parking available to residents? In this particular instance, approximately 80% of residents, local residents, have objected in one way or another. Now that's a high percentage. So if the council is going to override the vast majority of residents, all of whom it is right to say, or nearly all of whom, are raising the point that parking is already very restricted in most of the areas where these charge points are proposed. That requires a bit more of a good reason in my submission than simply a financial imperative. One gets a horrible impression, may I say, that to an extent the council finds itself in an unfortunate position of somehow being held to ransom by commercial entities who obviously have a very vested interest in installing as many EV charge points as possible. Now, they are not accountable to the local residents. You are. So I suggest that, frankly, what residents want as a matter of democracy is really very important. And also, as a matter of law, the council has an important statutory duty to actually fulfil a balance so that residents have sufficient and proper parking for facilities. So there's a mixture there of what is fair and democratic and also a legal obligation, which is, again, I've cited the actual act, it's section 122 of the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984. Now, disappointingly, that duty is not really highlighted in the report to you, that there's a passing reference to legal implications at paragraph 7 of the report, but it isn't, that particular important statutory duty isn't particularly highlighted. Put it this way, it doesn't actually jump out at you the way the report is drafted, unfortunately. So I also have specific concerns, and they're set out in section B of my written submissions, and that is in the particular area where the EV charging point is proposed where I live, there is already one charging point. The one that is proposed is no more than 80 metres away, and there's going to be another one which is about 80 metres away. So you're going to have a clustering of 3 charge points in a residential area where, as far as I know, nobody wants one. Nobody. Nobody that I've spoken to wants one. Now, I've taken the time and effort to make representations, but I assure you there's a very strong feeling in the local area about this. It's a difficult one. I'm torn because I'm now speaking personally, because I actually really do believe we need to do something to stop climate change. And I understand the policy considerations under trying to encourage electric vehicles. But then again, I balance that. I'm torn in that way internally. I'm balancing that against the reality of nobody in the area, to my knowledge, actually has an electric vehicle, nor are they likely to in the very near future, because frankly, they're too darn expensive. They're just too expensive. And you need to understand the demographic of the area where I live. People are not, especially in the current economic climate, they're not particularly flush with money. And what you do if you actually give a blanket approval here is you're riding roughshod over the vast majority of residents' wishes, quite apart from risking placing the council in breach of statutory duty. I'm quite happy to take questions within my minutes, if that's allowed.
That's not really how this bit works. You still have another minute left on your deputation, or are you...
I wanted to try and have a dialogue, but if that's not possible, that's fine. I've made the key points I need to make. I do urge, please, that everybody does read my written submissions, because I've done my best to try and set out in a logical way the concerns that I've just summarised. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. If I could now turn to the second deputation, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to express our concerns and some suggestions regarding to the proposed electric charging points on Owen Street and Ward Road. I represent several of my neighbours, all car drivers, who live on Collins Road between these two roads. Points we'd like to have considered: do we really need another 2 charging points in this area? We already have one in Linley Avenue, which very often I drive past and it isn't in use. Do we monitor the use at all to try and gain knowledge to see if it's really necessary to have 2 more charging points? The other thing that we'd like to have an answer to, if we could, is it possible that electric charging bays can be just are time limited, so they're an electric charging bay from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, and then revert back to a normal parking restriction outside of those hours? This would really help people who work and want to park near their homes. And the final point that we'd ask for consideration is, have we contacted the Co-op on Highland Road to see if we can use their car park, because they have quite a large car park. It's never looked full to me, and I think this would be a better usage of time for people to spend their 20 minutes of being charged if they could go into the Co-op, rather than just sitting in a car in a strange street. I have to comment that the majority of people who live in my road, Ward Road and Owen Street, I don't know anyone personally who has an electric car, so it isn't a need that's arisen by the local residents. They're my points. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you very much for your deputation. Okay, I'm now going to turn to councillors here and ask... Apologies, we have one more deputation.
That's okay. This one was from Dr. Helen Keeley, who couldn't come today. She says, I am writing to object to the proposal to install an EV charge point next to 26 Collins Road on Ward Road. Parking is extremely difficult in this area, particularly at night. I understand that the RPZ bay in question is 10.5 metres long. A 6-metre EV bay would leave 4.5 metres of RPZ bay. At the moment, between the double yellow line on the corner of Collins Road and Ward Road and the entry line next to the drop curb outside 26 Collins Road, there is room for 2 normal-sized vehicles to park. As far as I can see, if there was a 6-metre EV bay, there wouldn't be enough room for a car to park safely in the remaining space next to the EV bay, especially if a car being charged in the EV bay had been parked inconsiderately close to the edge of the bay. I understand that to shorten the EV bay would place the charge point outside of the lamp column location and would thus not be viable. It therefore appears to me that we would effectively lose 2 parking spaces in Ward Road, which seems inefficient use of space and unfair to us local residents. I live opposite the lamp column in question, and I have already made a number of points in my original objection dated 20th of August 2025, including 1, as far as I'm aware, nobody in the immediate vicinity of 26 Collins Road owns an EV, and 2, I've heard from other neighbours that existing EV charge points in this area are underused and often empty at night. Thus, it appears that more EV charge points aren't needed in this area at the moment, and so I object to the proposed installation.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, if I could turn to councillors and ask if they have any questions. We certainly can. So shall we do this in reverse order? Because I think in terms of the Collins Road, we have some new information.
Thank you very much. So since receiving the deputation, this location has been reviewed and we do have further information. This is the only RPZ bay that's part of this proposal that we propose. It is less than 5 metres, with most being greater than this. This location in particular has very unique circumstances due to the size of the current RPZ bay, the exact location of the lamp column, and a 4.5 metre as proposed RPZ bay, which is the recommended minimum within the city. Upon review, to implement the minimum sized RPZ bay, the column mounted charge point would be outside of the extent of the proposed EV bay, which is not practicable. We cannot move the bay without subsequent advertisement, and it is not prudent to place an RPZ bay shorter than the recommended minimum. Given this new information, whilst only marginally out of acceptable tolerance, we would not have recommended proceeding with this location in the original report, and hence can only advise not proceeding with the location due to the above information. So the recommendation is to not proceed with this location.
So the reason for calling that one back first is, again, something that we have consistently done is that we have taken out those bays where we have found that the distance is too short for it to be appropriate. In previous ones, we've had to call out, some of those have been called out in the report stage. The information that this one was going to be too short and was caused effectively 2 spaces to be lost to put in the one EV bay makes it seem no longer proportionate to do, and therefore I will listen to what councillors have to say, but I would be minded to pull it from the programme, even though it originally appeared in the report. I'm thinking that we're going to take these one at a time, otherwise this is going to get very confusing. So, are there any more questions or about the Collins Road application we've just heard about? Or comments, Simon?
The only comment I'd make, Chair, is the fact that, and I understand the logic behind what you're actually saying, and if the recommendation is to remove that, then you need to amend 2.1 because it approves the implementation of all 56. So therefore that needs to be amended somehow to get rid of the number 56 and have a secondary amendment to saying to remove whatever the reference number is on that. You can't, and perhaps I'm being a bit of a standing order pedant in this, you can't approve 2.1 and then say, by the way, we're going to remove that one. It needs to be documented in the recommendation. That's the only comment that I'm making on that.
And I would agree with you. Are there any more questions on that or comments?
In general, we made a point on the last point about disabled bays, about we can't do anything speculatively, we can't think if somebody else along the road is going to become disabled. So how can we, when it comes to electric vehicles, how do we decide on where electric vehicle bays are going to go? Obviously listening to Mr. Parsons' deputation, they just seem like they're sort of lumped there. And obviously I know we're in the consultation stage at the moment, but he's come back with 80% of people don't want them. So how do we get around that?
So I think there's a few things in there. So the 80% number isn't a number that I would recognise from the report. But I think let's start one stage back, and I would ask Bethan maybe to talk us through the 15-point plan about how we end up with the sites that we end up with, or is that going to be Mike?
I wasn't going to go through the 15-point plan itself, but to point out that these sites come from resident requests themselves. Okay. The 15-point plan that comes after that is then all of the technical work that goes behind it to make sure that those sites are feasible and that they're appropriate, and where possible, they're at the end of roads to remove as much of an impact on parking, because we understand parking is an issue. So that's where those requests come from. I've jotted down a number of notes in relation to Mr. Parsons' deputation. Would it be appropriate if I try and answer some of those now, or? Okay. Okay. So that one's ticked off. These have come from resident requests. Just to pick up on the other gentleman's deputation, we do monitor how our charge points are used, and this is via our charge point operator. And I would say for this area in particular, we see some of the highest utilisation of EV charge points. I go back to my point earlier that this is an emerging technology. This is a growing market. We do expect that it's not visible. There are not going to be cars plugged in all the time. That's growing over time as more and more EVs come into circulation. Just to respond to the point around why can't we use the co-op, this funding, which I will also come to, this funding is from central government, and it is specifically for on-street residential charging. We cannot use it to facilitate car park electric charging points in car parks. Okay, just to cover that one off. Moving to the issue of funding, I need to be clear, the funding is government funding. The government Department Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, OZEV, is funding not just us, but many other local authorities to put in a programme of EV charge points. And the point around 2.2, this actually picks up on previous decisions where we've deferred. When I say we, the Cabinet member, following discussion with councillor colleagues, has deferred sites for future batches. The 2.2 is about the fact that we can no longer defer sites because we have a programme for delivery which has had all of the sites selected a long time ago, and it's been approved by the Energy Savings Trust and by the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. And they've set a delivery programme. We need to deliver this by the end of the financial year because that's the way the funding works. We're not under economic duress. There is no commercial involvement in the funding deadline from our operator. Our operator has been appointed outside of this. The funding deadline is set by government. I need to make that really clear. There is no commercial involvement in that deadline. In terms of the Road Traffic Regulation Act, it's at the discretion of the Highways Authority on how road space is allocated. This is tested and supplemented through national policy guidance, TDRSG, and how other local authorities are applying that. And there are many local authorities who are going through a programme of installing EV bays. We have to strike a balance for all road users, recognising that if we don't, we will get to a tipping point where a significant proportion of our residents in this city will have nowhere to charge their vehicles. Moving to the site in question on Adair Road, yes, there are a number of charge points in the vicinity. As I said previously, this is an area where we have some of the highest utilisation. These have all come from resident requests, which indicates to us that there is a demand for this. For this particular location on Adair Road, we sent out 167 letters notifying 167 properties of this charge point, and we received only 3 objections to it. I think I may not have answered everything, but I'm happy to continue to do so.
I have a couple of other ones to pick up, but I'll come to those at the end. Councillor Stradwick.
Thank you. I think, Bethan, you slightly touched on it, and it's about, obviously, these aren't parking spaces. They can only be used when they're being charged. You mentioned about that you've monitored them and had a look. Is that in the report? Because I can't see.
This is just about a TRO. So this is all this is doing is just reporting to the cabinet member and colleagues.
It's just that there's been lots of mention of these EV charging points not being used, mentioned in all deputations and in all commentary. That's why I was asking. You said it.
So we know every.
Because you're referring to it. So
okay. No, I mean the purpose of a TRO report strictly is to just focus on the objections received. We know that every single charge point that's live at the moment has been used. And is being used. We do have access to utilisation data. It's not public because it's commercially sensitive data owned by our charge point operator.
That's what I was looking for. It's just because it's been mentioned in pretty much every complaint is that they're not being used. So that's why it's not in the report.
I think it might be worth pointing out that I don't want to get too technical, but obviously when these are slow chargers, so you plug in, you'll often plug in overnight, you'll leave your car there to charge and then you'll go off in the morning. It does mean that turnover may not seem as quick or as obvious. And, you know, in conversations with the industry, and we are heavily involved in networks with our fellow local authorities and beyond in terms of how the utilisation is going to grow, there is going to be a period of bedding in. It will, you know, it takes time for people to understand where they're going to find a charge point. How do they do that? It's via ZapMap, it's via online means or an app, and it's just building the infrastructure to ensure that people have the confidence to use it.
Sorry, I know my questions might be stupid because I've not been on transport for very long, but I'm going to ask them anyway. That's why I wanted to double check.
I don't think it was a stupid question because it's something that comes up a great deal, and one of the purposes, I think, of this session is actually an opportunity to make clear to people the rationale and the process by which these sites are selected and why they are being proposed. Are there any more questions? Councillor Bosher.
Oh, sorry. Plenty. Just a quick question on the comment that Emily made. Are these 7.5 kilowatt chargers?
Under 7, if that makes
Under
sense.
7.
So slow chargers, yes.
I was only going to make a comment because I've got an electric car and my home charge is 7.5 kilowatts, and I charge it between midnight and 5 o'clock, so for 5 hours, because that's a cheap rate for me, and depending on where I've been, I don't even get to a full battery in that period of time, Emily. The only time you're going to get it is if you plug it into a supercharger, but then you're paying through the nose and it tops it up in about 20 minutes, but that's a side issue. The deputy made reference to the fact that we sort of do these TROs. Am I right? Because been doing this quite a while, actually, and I just seem to understand that we've just had albeit a smaller block, but a block of disabled parking TROs, and when we do double yellow lines, they come forward as a block in that respect. So even though they go out to individual consultation per charge point, the fact that we consider them as a block is more to do with the timescale and the convenience for. Otherwise, we'd be sitting here going through 200 individual TROs and be here till midnight. That's my understanding of how the TRO process actually works as far as the, what's the word I'm looking for? The permission, so to speak, from the cabinet member actually works in that respect. But each TRO, irrespective of whether it's an EV, disabled parking bay or double yellow lines, will follow exactly the same legal process. Am I right in that? I think I'm asking a question I already knew the answer to anyway. I'm more interested actually, as I said, in 2.2, the funding side of it. Am I right in saying that the funding from the AUKS programme finishes, in theory, March next year before it, and therefore there is no further funding going forward into the next financial year? Is that what I'm reading in this 2.2, or is it not that? Not the case?
Bethan, give the wider answer.
I will try my best. So the AUKS funding is set. The delivery programme is through until the end of the financial year.
Yeah.
We can't deliver beyond that because of the terms of the central government funding, as was set out however many years ago. What happens next is there is further government funding through the Levi Fund, which is local electric vehicle infrastructure. There's quite a lot of acronyms.
They love their acronyms, don't they?
Yeah, which is in the offing. We have a certain amount of funding already allocated to us, but we have to go through a similar process of invitation to tenders and procurement and so on that we've done for AUKS. That one offers us a greater flexibility about how and where we offer EV charging infrastructure, which starts to pick up on things like car parks. We're not there yet, and we're moving through this programme now.
Right, so in short, there's going to be another report sometime in the future saying hopefully we've secured more funding and now we're more flexible with where we can actually do it. But the wider point about the co-op car park, that's private property, so that would fall outside of that anyway, as it would be for a local Sainsbury's or Tesco's. It'll only be applicable to on-street and PCC off-street parking, is what I'm getting from what you're actually saying.
I think, to be honest, we have to say that that's what we expect, because until it is actually done, we have to write a report, the report has to be accepted by the government, and the funding programme has to be as we expect it to be. So it could be that the fund, any new funds enable us to go to new sorts of locations, including off-street ones, which might include going to private places. I doubt it, that that's likely in the short run. It might give us greater variety as to what sort of charges that we can put in. So these ones are basically designed to be lamppost chargers, for want of a better descriptor. But there's a possibility, I believe, that we might be able to extend it to more rapid chargers, which provide more variety in charging for residents, being quicker, typically a little bit more expensive, and sited in different places. So I think we have to see what comes back. But the big picture is, if the forecasts for the uptake of electric vehicles come anywhere close to what is being predicted, then there will need to be an awful lot more public charges put into the Portsmouth system at some point. But we can only really answer on the fund that is available at this moment. Bethan, do you have anything more?
Well, only to say that obviously this is government funding, and therefore everything that we are doing has been approved by central government, and Energy Savings Trust, it's acting on their behalf. So there is a prescribed way in which we can spend the on-street residential charge point AUX. There'll be a prescribed way in which we can spend the Levi allocation in the future.
If I can, sorry, Peter, just come back on that. A lot of these are individual TROs, and I'm not going to sit here and presume to tell people what they can and can't do outside a house in Southsea when I don't live anywhere near Southsea, if you like, in that respect. So I always respect those views when it's a local situation. But it's probably more about funding and what we were saying at the start about an expected ramp up in it. That also depends on whether Rachel Reeves decides to whack a tax on electric vehicles in a couple of weeks' time. But I'm sure Graham's already told Rachel not to do that, or I'd like to think he has, or maybe not. But I've said on several times before, because this has been going on, I think to my sins, I was the one that started this actually, so you can all blame me for it. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. We are going to reach a tipping point, and I think we're almost at that tipping point in the city, where gaily going down this route of batches of EVs and sticking them in all over the city is going to outweigh perhaps, I know it's getting the infrastructure in place in demand, but you're effectively taking out parking spaces in anticipation of in an already congested area, and I think we're reaching that tipping point now. What are we doing to look at an alternative way of actually doing this that does not involve dedicated bays and TROs? Because I think if we aren't looking at that, I think we really do need to be looking at that, particularly if we're going to be chasing more funding.
I was about to answer, but Bethan started waving at me, so Bethan.
We are looking at that as part of the Levi funding moving forwards.
And I think I'd even put it wider than that. You know, anyone who gets involved in the council or local politics rapidly comes to know that parking is a big, big issue, and that the pressure in a lot of areas is really very, very intense. So we have to look, first of all, about what we can do to remove the need for the parking entirely, which is why the council continues to promote alternatives and complements to the car. Then you've got to look to see what it can do about managing the cars that are already there. And then you have to look at the specific schemes and the individual circumstances of each application. So I think you characterised it very well. Although this is like an umbrella report that is bringing together many different locations, each of them is individually considered and evaluated through, we won't go through it, Bethan, the 15-step process which looks at the demand, the potential demand, the operational constraints about doing it, what are the local situations on the street to make that as unobtrusive to residents wanting to park as possible, recognising, of course, that actually most, the 4% of cars in the city are already EVs, and they're already parking somewhere. So for quite a bit of the time, it's simply a matter of, like overnight, it's moving a car that is somewhere else that is going into an EV bay, because the majority of charging instances are on a trickle charge through a lamppost, are long charge periods on an overnight basis. Now this technology, this space is moving very quickly, just as the rate of EV adoption is moving very quickly. So it's very difficult to project many, many years in advance, but I think as we're seeing the price of EVs dropping, and there is government support for the transition towards electric, it's a reasonable expectation that the demand is going to grow very rapidly over the next few years, and it's going to move from where it was historically tending to be in the higher income parts of the city. It's going to move much more to the more mass parts of the city as it becomes a more affordable option for people to take. But we have to see where this takes us to.
I don't think you get too many on-street charging points in what you might call some of the more affluent areas of the city, to be quite honest, because a lot of people actually have off-street parking, and that's what they do, as I do. I think my point is a more general one. This is obviously a TRO, and we're going down that route, is the fact that going forward, and there's clearly going to be more government money available, and all right, the flexibility bit aside, but there's going to be more government money to put in more infrastructure. And I think the route, whether it's an umbrella report or not, of a TRO and a dedicated bay that nobody else can use other than a charging electric vehicle, is not going to be sustainable going forward, and there needs to be some alternative thinking if we're not careful. That's the comment I would make on that.
I think we've now merged into comments as well as questions, but I think that's fine because I think it's a really good way of the conversation coming up, and I will therefore make the comment back that I will say that I absolutely agree with you. I think there was actually the potential to be putting in many more on-street charge points in the kind of next round, and we are looking much more closely at alternatives to doing that because they are likely to be, I think, better for the city overall. So I'm now going to open up for any more questions or comments.
Yep. Leaping question.
Councillor.
I just wanted to clarify, apart from what the deputation was saying, that in fact we were aware, I understand, that there was always going to be a deadline for the financing of this, because I think you briefed us when we got the bid effectively, so that we were going to have to do quite a number of TROs in batches in order to be able to get this. I would be meeting every week, you know, which wasn't feasible. So there was never an issue of the deadline suddenly creating a demand for a batching. It was right from the very beginning. We knew what the deadline was. I think the only request was whether it would be extended, and we found that it wasn't. So we weren't anyway disadvantaged because we always knew that was the deadline. It was just, would we be getting a bit more leeway? So I think that's correct. I think the other thing about the point in the report, and I suppose it's, if you're reading this sort of without having had maybe the experience we've had of previous reports, is it says there are requests, but all the TRO does is point to the objections to a particular location. It doesn't actually identify the request. The requesters may not actually be living in that road. They may be living in adjacent streets, and there may be a number of requests that have come in, but we don't actually map those. But we know the officers don't make these up, so therefore we accept that that is the situation. Just to add a comment, I mean, I do think going forward we have got some issues because we have problems with vehicles parking in the city with not enough parking space. Replacing, you know, petrol vehicles with electric vehicles isn't going to solve the parking problem because the parking problems are already there. We may end up with a situation where electric vehicles can't find anywhere to park, which is not going to be sustainable either. So, but that's for future discussion. So I'll leave that there.
Any other comments or questions? I'm afraid not. We've had the deputation piece. So looking to my councillor colleagues, any other questions or comments? So I am just going to touch on a couple of things that were brought up in the discussion. I think, although Councillor Bosher says that was thinking about the houses which have their own drives, we also have to think about people who live in flats and blocks because they often don't have their own parking space and do rely on street spaces. I think definitely we also need to look at these charge points, just as we said with the disabled bays and just as we do with the residential parking zones, that these are areas. These are to serve areas, and therefore the demand that we are expecting to emerge will be served by these points by quite a surrounding area. It's not just the street that they are in. I think the other point of, we've done time waiting. We've covered off the funding pressures. I think I do need to address a little bit some of the things in the report where we were talking about our closeness with Zest. So clearly we have selected Zest to be our partner to deliver this because it is an area where the technology moves forward and it is not something the council is ever going to, in my expectation, have the capacity to deliver on its own. Having selected someone to work with, it obviously makes sense to bring that new facility to the attention of local residents, and that's why people such as me get photographed making cheesy smiles with the MD of the company. And although you say that my picture is on the Zest website, if you look around, you'll probably find me also on the First Solent, the Stagecoach, the Voi, and a number of other transport suppliers. And that's just a general part of the process of kind of managing the transport portfolio. So, notwithstanding the deputation that we've had today, having listened to it and gone through the report carefully, both this report that we received today, but also the general report that we get on each and every individual site, I need to sort of say that there is obviously a housekeeping process that goes on before we ever get to this chamber that tries to take out inappropriate or false locations, and we've had to come up today and say that one of those was slightly missed and has had to be taken out in this meeting itself. That's regrettable because ideally they would all be taken out beforehand. But these things happen. We found the mistake and we are correcting it. I am happy that the proposed location for this does make for the one in Adair Road to go in, and therefore, subject to outside of this meeting making an amendment to 2.1 to reflect that correctly, I am going to accept the other recommendations made in this report. And then just finally, as an observation, on the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984 as amended that was cited, there's a section 2 to it, section 2D, which says that I am expected to cover any other matters appearing to the Strategic Highways Company or the local authority to be relevant. And in this instance, I believe that the expected increase in electric vehicle penetration over the next little while is a relevant factor to consideration, and that was part of my decision-making process. Okay. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the third item on the agenda as a report, which is around parking and waiting restrictions on Tangier Road. If I can just get to the front of that. It's in this pack. That's fine. I think that presentation is going to be given by Bethan.
Yes, thank you. So this is another TRO report. It's on the proposed parking and waiting restrictions for Tangier Road, and this is in the Baffins ward. The proposal is based on a long-standing issue around an area of unrestricted curbside, which is at the eastern end of Tangier Road, close to the college, and I believe Goals, where over recent years there has been a predisposition for certain vehicles to be left for long periods of time, very long periods of time. And residents and councillors and businesses locally approached the council to raise this as an ongoing challenge. Having undertaken a considerable amount of work and engagement work with the local community, we brought forward proposals to implement weight restrictions on this part of Tangier Road, which is limited to 4 hours, no return within 4 hours, 8 till 6 p.m. on Monday to Sunday. This was consulted on this year. We had 4 objections, I believe, and a number of
responses in support, which I believe was also 4. 11 responses in total. So some were comments, 4 in support, and 4 objections. The recommendation is that we proceed. This allows for parking. It enables us to enforce for vehicles that are left for very long periods of time, and provides the local community with ability to park and use local amenities for dog walking and so on. The aim of the proposals is to better manage the parking, and that takes place in this location. A balance needs to be reached which suits the majority of users but also provides for the turnover. The hours of operation would cease at 6 p.m, which means that users would be able to park all evening on a first come, first served basis. The representations can be found in Appendix 6. So we recommend that the Cabinet member approves the recommendations as outlined in the report.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have one deputation to read.
Yeah, a written deputation from Councillor Kadir, who's a ward councillor for Baffins. He said, firstly, apologies for my absence today. I wish to support the plans affecting Tangier Road outlined today. This has been a bane for me and my colleagues in the Baffins ward for years. Despite promises by the MP and the council to fix it, this has not happened. The proposals before you today balance the need to remove vehicles with making sure people can still use Great Saltons. They are similar to ones former Councillor Stagg, current Councillor Sanders and I supported 3 years ago. I'm sad it has taken this long to get it done, but please, something is finally happening. I do, though, have a couple of issues I want you to look at. The first is to make sure displacement of taxis onto nearby roads does not happen. Therefore, I asked Transport to review that, say, next summer. When City Fibre dug up the area a couple of years ago, forcing taxis out of there, that did not happen, but it helps to check. Oh, and please make sure this is enforced. Wardens must patrol this area. Secondly, we note the 2 or 3 days a year when there are softball tournaments, Baffins ward councillors have already suggested approaching the college and council housing department to allow their car parks to be used. Please do so. The speed cushions along the road are already slowing cars down, and this will help deal with another major issue in the Baffins area. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? It's a fairly straightforward one, I hope, this one. I've got a few comments to make. Does anyone else have any comments they want to make?
Just make a brief comment. As I traverse that road quite regularly, I noticed that even now the prospect of those changes has made a difference because the road is much clearer than it used to be, even before the restrictions have been brought in.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, agreed. It definitely has made a difference. The taxis have started to move. And it was just a comment on other vehicles dispersing into residential streets. A lot of the vehicles that are parked along there are parked there specifically so someone can drive past them every day and make sure they're there and okay. They're not going to be wanting to disperse them all over the place into residential streets. There was a lot of disused taxis. There's now a lot of rubbish trucks piled up to the sky, but I can't see them dispersing into residential streets.
I'm certainly hoping you're right, and I think also to push back on the deputation a little bit, you know, be careful what you ask for. So as was stated, this has been a long-standing request. It is now being put in place. There are always consequences of any kind of transport action, and displacement is a possibility. I agree with you. I think that they probably won't do so in such a big number or in such a visible way, but they will have to go somewhere. And we cannot promise that if we take them out from one end that we're going to chase them through the city to prevent them parking legally where they are allowed. But I think this is a good thing to have done. I think the second one for me is around the softball the softball matches there. I should perhaps have declared an interest because back in the day I was actually a softball player. I believe I might have been I was the shortstop for the South Sea Sharks, and most valued player in about 1999 or something like that. So I hope that is not considered prejudicial at this point in time. Yes, maybe I am actually, Councillor Heaney, you found me out on that one. But I think the point again that I want to make clear, because it's about trying to be consistent with things across the city. So we have accommodated the softball, I think, reasonably well by making it 4 hours, because for most matches that is okay. It is introducing an issue for them which is around the days when they have a tournament, and they are going to need to make some appropriate arrangements for having those tournaments, which is looking for some alternate parking places, discouraging some or encouraging their teams to actually come together rather than individual cars. And we will see what we can do as a council to facilitate that, but there is a limit to what can actually be done, and that is the case for all sporting events and activities around the city. You know, where something can be done, it can be done. Where it can't, it can't. So, once again, I'm happy to accept the recommendation as laid out on this instance, and with that, unless anyone else has got anything more, I'm going to close the meeting, and thank you everyone for attending.